name is Heather McGee, and this is the Happily Never After, a podcast that explores how life's endings can lead to a personal breakthrough. Because sometimes the end is just the beginning. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Happily Never After, a podcast where we explore how life's endings can lead to a new beginning. If you enjoy the show, don't forget to rate, review, and follow us wherever you are listening or watching the show today. My guest today, I'm so excited to welcome her, is Tia Levings. She is the New York Times bestselling author of A Well-Trained Wife, her memoir of escape from Christian patriarchy. Tia writes about the realities of religious trauma, evangelical patriarchy, and the trad wife life. Decoding the fundamentalist influences in our news and culture, her work and quotes have appeared in Teen Vogue, Salon, Newsweek, and the Huffington Post. And she's also appeared on the hit Amazon docuseries Shiny Happy People, which is a show that I have also watched. She also has a new book called I Belong to Me, which will publish on May 5th of this year. And I'm so pleased to welcome you to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, Tia, can you talk a little bit about your story for anyone that might not be familiar?
Yeah, just a high level recap is that I was born, normal family, Christian family, very lifestyle, culturally Christian. We went on the important days, and it was a bigger part of my mom's life than it was our whole family's. And that was the case until I was about 10, and we moved to Jacksonville, Florida, which was total, utter culture shock. I went from a little tiny town to a giant city, noisy, the whole thing overwhelming. And so my parents decided to do a very normal thing. They took their kids to church so that we would make good friends and have good experiences and be safe and love God and, just have a nice childhood. And so that church turned out to be a large Southern Baptist megachurch, one of the few in the country at the time. This was in 1984. And then it quickly took over our lives. We were at church all the time, 6 days out of 7. And as I grew up, it became more nationalist and more fundamentalist as that 10-year period passed. And when I was around 18, 19 years old, I knew at that point that I was like, there's really only one outcome for girls. Girls are supposed to become Christian wives and mothers. I happen to want that for myself, so I wasn't that upset about that. It was a little bit of a struggle to put my own desires for college and school and things aside, but I was pretty much on board with this happy outcome. And what comes along for the ride with that is that you don't really say no to men in any capacity, and you know God's will through the male voice. So when a young man approached me and said he liked me, and then a month later said that he wanted to marry me and that I was God's will for his life, I said sure and yes, and we were married within that year. It was already abusive. He was a disorganized person who deeply loved God and wanted to be better, but he was not mentally consistent. And it was too late. I was married. I had been a virgin bride, sexually assaulted immediately, and thought I, loved him and I wanted to make the best of our lives as possible. But what happened is we would go to church, pastors and counseling and things and ask for advice on how to fix the problems in our marriage. And we were always pointed back to submission, headship, godly values, pastoral books, pastoral resources. And so we were constantly turned back inward to the system. And to today, I call it church sanctioned domestic abuse for that reason, because the patterns were toxifying our family. I had, in 10 years, I had 9 pregnancies, 5 live births, and 4 surviving children. We homeschooled, homesteaded. I was a trad wife. I was all the things. It didn't matter how perfect I was or enough I was or anything. That power dynamic was not something we could ever overcome. The violence and the cycles that we had. We narrowed our theology and eventually became part of Doug Wilson's Covenant Reformed Evangelical Church, which Pete Hegseth, our Secretary of Defense, is a member of today. So they have fulfilled their goal of taking over the American government, which was always the plan. And I escaped in 2007 with my children and my life. It was very harrowing, very scary, very violent. And then had to put myself back together after that. So the next 10 years were about healing. And that brings us to today, because it was in the midst of that process that I realized the story I was working on, which was my story and my experiences I was working on in therapy as journals, um, needed to be shared more broadly because everything that I ran away from was coming for the country through Christian nationalism. And the only person who can really tell people what that's like is somebody who's been through it before. So I joined the many survivors talking about their experiences in Christian patriarchy. And I guess the only difference about Tia is that I can also write really well. So my book sold to a major publisher, and now I do podcasts like this. So that's my
Yeah.
recap.
Well, I appreciate you coming on to talk about because these things are, I feel you because I'm also working on a book and it is very emotional. It's very emotional. These things are hard to talk about, but I think if you can do it, it releases some of that shame and it helps so many
Yeah,
other people because T and I were talking about this a little bit before we started recording. This actually has happened to many, many mothers, children. It's not just us.
right.
There's a whole lot
Far
of
from it.
people out there. Now, I think we might need to explain a few things for people that are not familiar with the ways of fundamentalism. One thing
Mhm.
that is very, and you mentioned this a little bit in your recap, is the idea of submission. That women need
Yeah.
to submit to their husbands. Anyone who's even been in moderate Christianity has heard this. Can you kind of
Mhm.
explain a little bit about what that is and the impact? Like that one little thing makes
Yeah.
such an impact on so many women and girls.
Well, and it really has because evangelical pastors took part of that verse and ran with it real hard, and patriarchy loves it. So in the Christian patriarchy, it's a vertical power structure where men are on top, women are submissive, and the children are under the woman. It is sometimes called the umbrella of authority. So if you have any familiarity with Bill Gothard's ministry, which was part of my story as well, the umbrella of authority is it's presented as a benevolent protective measure that you have this caring head of your household and you will submit to him in everything. And it's taken from a verse in Ephesians, which is the Apostle Paul describes what he recommends as unmarried man, and in a little bit in contrast to Jesus's model, um, that women should submit in all things and love their husbands and submit to their husbands. And the verse follows up and says, and husbands should all likewise, um, you know, submit to their wives and care for them the way that Christ loved the church. It's really a more of a mutual picture in reality, but that is not how it's presented in American Christianity, and also not in the current trad wife movement, which we're seeing this rise of pastors preaching on submission is very one sided. The real danger with it is there's several questions that immediately come up. Like, if she's to submit, what happens if she doesn't? Um, a line of my story, a vein in my story that includes the disciplinary actions that are taken when a wife refuses to submit or doesn't submit well enough, or a spirit of sin is detected in her. I mean, this is a very slippery slope. Also, can he handle that amount of responsibility? What happens to a mutual partnership when you take one partner and you pretend that they are now a dependent and not a team player at all? And then what if he's not benevolent? What if he's violent? What if he's actually malevolent? So there's no answer for any of that in the sermons and in the presentation, which is very true to fundamentalism itself, which can be in anything, but in religion, what it especially does is it portrays this ideal image of what you should strive for, and here are the steps to follow it. And if you do these things, such as submission, you will have this happy result. You'll have this happy home. You'll have obedient children who love you and never estrange from you, and this is the solution to the problems. And if there are problems with that, if it hits any snags, it's never the system's fault. It's always the user's fault. So you know, practitioners then internalize the failures.
Yeah, and kind of the funny thing about that too, and I am sure you heard this, there's a lot of conversation in fundamentalism around what makes a good Christian, and I say that with quotes, good
Hmm.
Christian. And so to your point, it's up to the user to be a good Christian, and if you're not a good Christian, it's possible you might go to hell because it's not real. It's for
Right.
you, is the way it's framed. So this idea of submission, it is another way to keep women under control.
Hmm.
Because if they are not submissive, if they have too much of an attitude, if they're not sweet, stay sweet,
Hmm.
um, you're not a good Christian. And it's another way to keep women under control. But it is so funny. Like I've been out of fundamentalism myself for about, I don't know, 30 years at this point,
Hmm.
25 years. And I look back on that time so differently, trying so hard to live up to the standards, and
Right.
it's never enough. You're never going to get there.
Hmm. No, it's, draining and all-inclusive and consuming, and, most people who live that way are trying actually really hard to do the right thing. They're not evil people, they're trying really hard to love God and love their families, um, and they keep hitting the wall 'cause they're never enough.
Yeah. And there's also a lot of conversation about, you're really encouraged to fellowship, that word
Mhm.
specifically,
Yes.
with other Christians from your group. And you're not really supposed to, it's called fraternize. Like all these terms are
Mhm.
coming back to me with
Yeah.
people outside of Christianity or with the secular world, because the fear is that they will influence you and you will start to have different ideas and walk away from God, and it might endanger your faith. Um, and so it's just like it is very interesting to me how all these things keep you from learning. And then when you walk out into it, you realize everything you were taught was wrong. So whenever people question, well, how could you be in that for so long? How did you not
Mhm.
know? You don't talk to anybody else. So
Right.
you really do not know that there's another way to live.
Yeah, I used to call it the invisible prison because we were so isolated, but we were in plain sight. There were no bars on my windows. It was just I knew not to talk to anybody who wasn't like-minded, was our code word for it. And I always thought it was this very limited, small view of God. Like, God is like my faith is so delicate that I can't talk to someone else. I can't hear another idea. I can't weigh another idea or ask a question. Like, that didn't seem like a very vast, omnipotent, divine being to me. That's, it was like, I don't think you're telling the story you think you're telling when you say that.
When you look back on that time, I've come to a place where I feel like it's a cult based
Hmm.
on,
Yeah.
you're not allowed to think otherwise. You have to act in a very certain way. You can't talk to other people. What is your thought on that? Is that too
Yeah.
strong a word?
No, I don't think it's too strong a word because there's multiple kinds of cults. There are dedicated cult scholars who study this, and it meets the criteria that has been, determined for a cult. Looking on my desk right now because I might have taken it downstairs. The Culting of America by Daniela Mistanek-Young is a great book to look at family cults, one-on-one cults. It's a system of mind control that keeps you isolated. So a lot of things fit that. And she breaks it down really well. So no, I don't think that's too strong of a word at all.
That sounds like a book I would like to read.
You would love it, and she's great. She's known as the knitting cult lady online, and, she deals with all the, current events and their culty roots, and she's, like, knitting up a storm the whole time while she's doing it. It's
Oh, that's
amazing. I
hilarious.
can't multitask like that, but mad props.
Now, can you explain one thing to our, because there's a lot to explain here, because anyone who did not grow up this way, I know my friends, when I talk about things that happened when I was a kid, they're like, "What? Like,
Right?
what do you mean?" So there's a phrase called being quiverfull, which is a,
Mhm,
a pretty designated
mhm,
sect. And, in Christianity, which I think a lot of people do know about this part, they're very anti abortion, anti choice, even calling birth control, a form of
mhm.
abortion. Can you talk to our listeners a little bit about what it means to be quiverfull and your thoughts on how that impacted your life?
Yeah, so it's based on a verse in the Bible, which most of this stuff is. They pick a verse, or they pick the ideology and then apply a verse. There's a little bit of chicken and the egg there, but um, the verse is equating children to weapons of war, and if you want going into war, you want as many weapons as possible. So you would want as many children as possible if you're fighting a culture war, which we very much believed we were. That was drilled into us repeatedly that we needed the population, specifically white Christian babies, to keep us from this big scary thing that was coming for us, where white people would be the minority if we didn't procreate at larger numbers. Definitely hear echoes of this happening right now. They're pushing for it right now from the administration on down. But they weren't in the administration 20 years ago. They were just, in these conferences and things that we were following. So it started out pretty subtle, little suggestions here and there that birth control wasn't good for you and that you should be afraid of it and that it would, yes, cause abortions and then, like, another little clever suggestion would be, "Well, don't you trust God to be in charge of your family size?" So now immediately your faith is being tested if you want to put a limitation or an honest assessment on your capacity to afford a whole child all the way to 18. They don't really talk about whole children. They talk about having as many babies as possible. That's also very intentional because it's easy to want babies. Who doesn't want babies? And by the time you breastfeed and cloth diaper and use hand-me-downs, you can offset the cost of having that baby to a large extent. And then nobody really mentions what's like to raise nine. Like, what if you have nine teenagers? Like, nobody talks about that because they kind of skip adolescence and you just go straight to adulthood anyway. So childhood
Yeah.
is very altered in Quiverfull homes. You don't really have much of a childhood, especially if you're a girl. You go right to work and caring for children. So it isn't uncommon for me to meet parentified older daughters that have been caring for babies since they were toddlers themselves, and they have these para-mother relationships with siblings instead of an actual healthy sibling relationship. And there's like abuse stories and things that happen in these large homes that are a feature of these large homes that is swept under the rug and kept quiet because, again, it's the ideal that's being pursued. And you always want the young, fertile generation to become your breeders or your soldiers. So they always go hard for young types and encourage you to have as many children as you can possibly have. So that is why I had 9 pregnancies in 10 years. Um, I did those, some of those were very early miscarriages, but the idea was to have as many as possible. And I was breastfeeding that whole time. And I snuck birth control a couple times. So I was actually trying not to have them so close together. It was more of a, is this healthy, to have them so close together? But they come when they're supposed to, I guess. When I was done, I was done. I said I was done, and then my last baby was here, and that was the last of my capacity. So, yeah. So,
Well, and you hear a
yeah.
lot too, don't you trust God? God
Yeah.
won't let you get pregnant unless it's the right thing. And then suddenly you're the bad guy for
Right.
not wanting to
Arguing
be
with the
pregnant
nature.
again.
I kept saying, "God put cycles in place. Nature's has cycles. If you have sex, you will procreate. You stand a chance to, because that is the process that's been in place." And then I would get hushed and reprimanded and, "No, no, no, that's not what that's all there for." And, you can't space out. You can't say no to sex. You can't, all of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're literally, for anyone listening, if you grow up in fundamentalism, you are told it is your job. It is your
Mhm.
job to have sex with your husband. And if you turn him down ever, you're a bad Christian. You're not a good wife.
Oh, yeah.
Really, you give up all sense of self.
They even had pastors saying that there was a 48-hour rule that a man can only handle it 48 hours, and if you make him go longer than that, you're harming him. You're harming your marriage. So I mean, the messaging is not health information. It is not medical information. It's not psychological information. It's all mind control.
Yeah. And also something, you're making me think about, there's so much to this subject. A lot of these women are having home births.
Mhm.
And I feel it is my point of view that we're discouraged from going to the hospital because you're going to have contact with the outside
Yeah.
world. Doctors, they're going to tell you, you don't have any more kids. Like they're going to tell you things, and that's not what the church wants to be happening. So a lot of these women are encouraged to have a home birth. It's a natural state, except home births are not the right situation for all pregnancies.
No, it really isn't, and I had 3 of them, and I can say that. I had 2 hospital
Yeah.
births and 3 home births. And I love my midwives, and they took excellent care of me, and still, pregnancy is complicated, and when which I did know, the motive behind all of it was to be more isolated from the world. It wasn't that home was better for birth, although there's some argument to be made for that in a normal, healthy situation, that a home is not a dangerous place to give birth in most situations. But that isn't the real reason why they wanted us at home. There was other things that were happening, such as not registering your child with the state, not giving them vaccines, not opening yourself up to mandatory reporters, not having to maintain a job that might require the need for health care. We weren't going to the doctors and taking our kids to well checks because then you have to have insurance. And if you have to have insurance, then you have to have 2 jobs. And, so they have this way of narrowing you into a single income family. So it's a voluntary or necessary choice. There's really no option. Someone has to take care of all these kids. Now she has to stay home. Now you're living on one impoverished income where, in a culture where it's really hard to live off of one income for most people. But the babies are coming. And so what are you going to do? And a midwife is a lot cheaper than a hospital. And so you're home. Um,
Yeah.
my 2 hospital births, one was a prodromal labor that just wouldn't end. And then I almost had her in the car, so she was real fast. And then my, second hospital birth was a very high needs medically sensitive baby who had a major heart defect, and I
Yeah.
prayed with desperation that whole pregnancy that, if I was supposed to go to a hospital for the Lord to please let me know. And I went into preterm labor, at 32 weeks, and we found out there was a complication, but I wasn't even according to my mentors and the women in my church, I shouldn't have even gone to the hospital for that preterm labor. I should have stayed
Right.
home and just called my midwife, and she would have been breaking the law to come to me, but, there's women that will do that.
Yeah, and I will say in reading your book, which I have right here, when you told the story about, you didn't have the money to hire a midwife and that whole situation, my heart just broke for you because how many women are in that situation where they know what needs to be done, they know the right thing, but they are trapped where they have no
Mhm.
control, no resources, like literally nothing that can help them, and you're just desperate,
You
and
are, yeah.
that
Yeah,
story
well,
broke
and
my
then they
heart.
they go into, there's this rise right now for free births and husband-assisted births where they're not even midwife attended, and I watched some reels recently about this. I recognize the enthusiasm that women have when they're trying to talk themselves into an idea or they're trying to talk it up and present it like it's a good, positive thing because they're self-gaslighting. They have doubts and questions and would not really choose it to be this way, but they're trying to make the best of a really bad situation, and if you can talk yourself through it, that's part of how to survive it. So I I heard it and I just got chills all over my body because there's so many things that could go wrong for lay people. You cannot learn everything you need to know by watching some videos and get a few books on birth and then trust nature is just going to take care of itself. Lots of things happen that skilled hands can take care of really easily. And yeah, my heart just breaks. My heart breaks for the situations. There's so many open secrets in fundamentalism that are horrifying to people who assume, oh, well, if you have let's say you have a late term miscarriage, you're definitely going to the hospital, right? No, no, and they might just bury it in their backyard. I mean, like that
Right,
happens. Meanwhile,
right,
they're pressing for these abortion laws where women are going to have to bring their miscarriage remains to the hospital to prove they didn't have an abortion, and they want to criminalize these women. And I'm like, are you going for the fundamentalist women too? Because they're burying them with rose bushes. So, you
yeah,
know, they don't have that honest conversation about the reality. It's always other
right.
people an agenda. So yeah, I get upset about all of it because I know what really goes on in those homes.
Yeah, and it really brings home to me the whole idea of, well, trust God. Trust
Yeah.
God with your family size, trust God with this, that, and the other. And what the reality of that is, you don't go get help. And the idea is if you
Mhm.
have a miscarriage, well, God wanted that to happen. Or
Yeah.
if you have a home birth, well, if it doesn't work out, God wanted that to happen. And it causes a lot of damage in a way that I think really messes with your mind. You don't make good decisions because you've been told, well, God's in control. These
Mhm.
are phrases you hear every day in fundamentalist churches. God's in control. He won't let anything happen that he doesn't want to have happen. It's all in God's plan. And so you end up in these really bad situations because there's no need to go to a doctor. There's no need to go to a hospital. There's no need to try to leave your home or leave your husband who is abusing you because this
Mhm.
is what God wants to happen. I don't understand why, but God wants it. And that's why this is occurring in my life.
Yeah, I rode that surfboard for a long time too. I mean, God
Yeah.
seemed to very chaotic and a very convenient scapegoat. There was always someone to blame or push off responsibility for anything that I might have done that brought this into my life or allowed it to perpetuate. Because I could just blame it all on God and and higher spiritual reasons. And that was reflected back to me in my group. So my little bubble was all, of the same mindset. And then eventually it gets to a place where I'm like, well, God doesn't really seem to know what's going on here, or God
God
contradicts
is not
himself
doing
a
a good
lot.
job.
Yeah, God's hurting me a lot here, and I know I'm doing my best. I'm following all the rules. Like, is this really God or is this like maybe something else going on here? And also, didn't God give me a brain in my head to be able to see things? And didn't God make me fearfully and wonderfully made as well? And didn't He give me an intellect? And a lot of times, this is what really brought me to my breaking point. for my children, I was the only other adult in the room. They needed an advocate, and I could not just continue to abdicate my role and my responsibility by saying, "Well, God's got us," because I knew if God's got us, He's got me here to have us. Like there was no reason in our doctrines and theology why God couldn't work through me to protect my kids. Except I wasn't protecting my kids. I was just letting this go on, and then putting a really shiny covering on everything to make it look like we're so blessed. We're such a
Ooh,
happy family.
Um, you're making me think about something that, and I actually started thinking about this when you mentioned this earlier. There's a lot of directives around, having a lot of babies and, women get married off pretty young. What I noticed is that I don't think I ever heard any conversation about how can you be a good parent to this many kids? Like how can you
Right.
give them what they need? Like, I don't think I ever heard that conversation, not once.
Yeah, I asked it once of my mentor, and it was again the platitude about God. Like, God will give you what you need when you need it, is what I was told. And my immediate thought, which, because I brought to this a natural skepticism, my personality is a questioning personality and always was. And while I learned to suppress that, it would break through at times. And a moment like that is one of those times where it broke through. And I was like, well, God's giving me reservations right now. Why isn't that the answer? Why isn't my honest admission that this is a lot to handle and I might not be up for this whole task? Because I was grappling with abuse and depression and, medically sensitive children. And um, we were poor and I didn't know what to do. And so I just sat with that for a minute, like thinking like, how do I know God's voice from this moment to that moment and which one's real? Um, is it just real because they like it? That's what makes it real. Like they agree with it. So that's what makes it real. Because I think God's telling me I need to slow down. I need to not have so many children. Something's wrong here. I need help. I went to my mentor because I needed help. And I thought I was going to a godly counselor, Titus 2, let the older women teach the younger. So I thought I was asking the right source. And she didn't really have my interest in mind or an honest reflection of what I was crying out for help about. It was what was going to protect the image of the group and keep the steady line and whatever you do, don't get divorced, that kind of thing. So it really wasn't about me or what God might want for my life or my family. It was what they needed me to have in order to keep the group continuity.
Right. Now, one thing that occurred to me, and I think probably a lot of people would have this question, it doesn't sound like your parents were quite this extreme. Like you were not raised to this into the range in fundamentalism.
Mhm.
And you talked in your book, your first book, a little bit how it's almost like you drifted into it and then, kept going. What do you think was in you? How did that happen? Like, how do you think that
Yeah.
happened in your life?
So you're right. My parents were not this extreme. They trusted the church to take care of me. They trusted we were in a good environment. I don't think they gave it a lot of thought. My sister was having a great time. I seemed to be having a great time, and I wasn't coming to them with a lot of the things that were happening because I thought they were isolated or not that big of a deal, or it wasn't good to talk about it. You don't want to gossip, so I was really trying to be the good Christian girl that obeys and trusts God, that is the things that I see that are disruptive or a problem will smooth out, that He's got it. It's not for me to interfere myself with. And like I said at the beginning, my church was changing over that decade. It was becoming more political and fundamentalist. And so that happens slowly, and you're not confronted with choice after choice after choice. You're just slowly adapting to a narrowing, changing culture, very much like we're doing now, where our culture is, when we look back in a 10-year gap, we can see the changes, but we can't necessarily see them from last year or the year before. Um, we can with presidency, but not so much with long cultural norms and things. So it takes time to look back and see that something's changed. And so I didn't know that I was falling for anything. I thought I was obeying God and being more devout. And you expect
Okay.
a more devout life to be more
Yeah.
rigorous and harder and have suffering, and the suffering is glorified and you're aligning with Christ when you suffer well. So I just thought it was supposed to get hard. Everyone around me
Yeah.
talked about marriage as hard. We didn't ever talk about chemistry or compatibility. That might have helped things. They never did talk about that. They talked about being a good wife and praying for your husband and loving him even though he's imperfect. And yes, it's hard, but Christ faced things that were hard. It was always this arduous struggle up the hill. And so when it was a struggle up the hill, I wasn't surprised. I was like, okay, well, it's supposed to hurt. This is what I'm doing, is a hard, devout thing. And yeah, it was only in hindsight where I look back and I see there's a pattern here, and I do have a trauma survivor's amazing pattern recognition skill, which was honed over time. And I was able to look back and see, I see the pattern here. This isn't the fruit of what we're doing is not good fruit. I don't
Yeah.
want to keep doing this. I can't keep doing this. And there was no space for that. You are not allowed to admit failure or change your mind. And I had trapped and isolated myself through my choices and through the system. So it's designed to do that. They want to take away our divorce laws right now because they don't want it to be easy for you to leave. They think that results in longer marriages, and that's automatically a good thing. It will result in longer marriages. It'll also result in a higher death rate and
Yeah.
higher violence count and children who are traumatized. So, like, yeah, divorce was blamed, not the reasons that might lead to one.
Yeah, like looking at the wrong problem. Okay, I
Mhm.
get that. So, for anyone who's not familiar, there's just so much pressure on being a good Christian and lover of Christ, and how devoted can you be? And
Mhm.
so, okay, I understand that. Now,
Yeah.
for you, there was a point where you did say enough and you left. Can you
Yeah.
talk about how did you break that mental side of like I'm doing what I need to do. I love God. I want to be a good wife and a Christian. But you reached a point where you're like, I'm done, and you literally escaped. What
Yeah.
brought you to that point? How did you know that this was it? You're done.
It was not so sudden. I was excommunicated from our church for writing in my own name.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, and that happened in January, I think. January maybe of 2008. I was at a place where I was absolutely at the bottom of any personal faith journey. If God didn't know me or think anything unique or special about me. Like I said earlier, I don't think God's really got this in control. I really started to question everything and not feel like, okay, well, if I'm just nobody, then I don't need this. So I went to the library. We had this amazing library system in Tennessee, and I brought home a book on every major world religion. I was looking for another way to love God. Like, I didn't wanna leave my faith, I didn't wanna leave Jesus, but I could not keep up with this Calvinist, high control system that we had been a part of. I mean, we had signed a covenant. It's as culty as a Christian church can get, and, um, lots of, condoned violence was happening as a result for it. So, I ended up discovering Eastern Orthodoxy. There was a church in our town that was, an Eastern Orthodox church. We visited it, and we converted in April. What that meant for us was that the high control and the rigid systems of rules was gone. And unbeknownst to think all of us, my husband needed that external structure system to know how to be in the world and in his family. And without it, he completely fell apart. So from April till about October was a major psychotic break for him. And it culminated in a very violent night on Halloween, and it was really a split second decision of run. You have to leave the house right now. He had left the house for a few minutes. I didn't know why. He had been yelling at me for 4 hours and basically not letting me leave. He was threatening to kill me with a length of firewood. And I didn't know what to do, but I heard this voice in my head that said run. So I grabbed the kids and I put them in the car and we left. And I didn't know I was leaving for good that night. I didn't know that our marriage was over. I just knew that I didn't want to die and I didn't want my kids to die. And I knew that he was thinking that. We passed him on the way through town and he had gone to his office to go get his gun. So he absolutely was thinking of our ending our lives that night. And it took weeks, to realize that you can't go back when something is like that. And there were some other things that happened, in the immediate fallout that eventually made it very clear we would never be going back. But it wasn't. I waited too long. I waited until it was almost a life or death situation. And looking back at it, I wish I could have had the clear-minded courage to leave sooner. Maybe during the day when he was at work. Um, yeah, is I don't recommend waiting until the last exit on the highway.
Yeah. My dad used to say, don't wait till you're actually drowning to call it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the thing is when you're being abused, your mind is not in the
No,
right
you don't
place,
know that
you
it's the
know?
end, you know?
You don't even know what's going on, which is why
Mm-mm.
I get really frustrated when people criticize, women that took a long time to leave, and they're like, "Well, why didn't you just leave?" It's like, it mm, someone who's being abused, it takes a long time to even know what's going on because things have happened to their brain. They don't understand what's going on.
Yeah. I didn't even call it abuse. I didn't know until, oh, I don't know, about a month later, I met my first attorney and he handed me a book about a battered woman. And I was like, I don't need that. And he's like, yeah, you do. You're in here. And I was like, I absolutely am not. He never punched my face. That was my mind. Like, if he'd never punched me in the face, then I wasn't abused. And so little did I know. I'd had sexual abuse, financial abuse, emotional abuse, psychological abuse, spiritual abuse, physical abuse. But yeah, I didn't know to call it that. I had to learn. I had to learn what all that meant.
People that have left high control religions and that are healing from religious trauma, we call it deconstruction. What does that
Mm.
deconstruction process look like for you in the years afterward?
Yeah, well, I differ a little bit. I consider deconstruction to be just a questioning of why and
Okay.
what, and knowing what you believe. And I ascribe deconstruction to literally everything. I feel like I'll be deconstructing the rest of my life. I've deconstructed colonization, for example, not necessarily religious, but something I had to like break apart and see what is taught and how it got here and what I believe about it. And allowing myself to change my mind when I get new information. That's also part of deconstruction. So, when I left in 2007, these words were barely formed. They were being just starting to be talked about online. And so I kind of like discovered it with other people as it evolved, as the therapeutic community took it and worked with it, as theologians did, as people left and were exiled, exiled away from the church and left the evangelical movement. All of this is a process that I lived through and healed through. So it's very braided in my experience, along with recovery, because I was also doing like aggressive trauma therapy, speech therapy. I went through a major health crisis because your body does keep the score when you live in complex trauma for decades. All of that came to roost and had to be sorted out. I really didn't get into the heavier aspects of faith deconstruction until probably the 2016 election, because I totally assumed that every church I had been a part of would absolutely reject Christian nationalism. I couldn't imagine they would embrace it. And I was wrong. And when I watched it happen, I knew what slope they were on. I knew it was coming. And so that I think really encouraged me to keep asking and knowing and finding out what do I believe apart from a system, because I don't ever want to be swept away by slowly narrowing beliefs ever again. I want to be in my mind.
Now, I know you have a lot of thoughts about that, um, about the connections between what you experience with Christian patriarchy and then what we're seeing in the news today. Can you say a little
Mhm.
bit about the connections you see?
Yeah. So some of it might go over the average Christian's head. Like this is not something that's always talked about in a lot of churches. And so it doesn't always seem related. However, the background that I have was very clear and open about their strategy for government dominion, is what it's called. Christian dominionism is the idea that you will, as Christians, take over the country and eventually the globe. And it's to usher in the second coming of Christ, but that could be argued with the amount of power that comes along for that ride, and the compromises they're willing to make in order to get that power. So they aligned with someone who, as a presidential candidate, does not espouse any of the behaviors that they would hold us to, even. He does not follow our standards, but they were willing to align with it in order to get power. And that's in keeping with the super PACs and the interest groups like the Heritage Foundation, which are all populated with people who are in my past, who are part of the networks that we were a part of, the
Yeah.
conventions, all the things. These are all the same names for the past 30, 40 years. And they have just carefully scaled it up to where everything that we experienced in our little granular homes is actually going to be the plan for the whole country, both on a government level and in each home, because those other behaviors that they don't want us doing will be outlawed or defied. One of the things I talk a lot about today is that there's no like constitution in patriarchy. There's no Bill of Rights in patriarchy. Trad wives live a very narrow agrarian, type life because they're forced to, and towards an end, because you're very busy. You're not in the public sector. Women are not in the public sector, and they're not allowed to speak or teach or lead men. They don't have jobs. They don't have birth control. So we're seeing these freedoms change, and it's in keeping with the movement from Project 2025, which was written by the Heritage Foundation. So while it may be a less visible aspect of government, it's very infiltrated, and they have aligned with the technology and the money that it takes to overhaul an entire society.
It's heavy.
It is heavy, and all I know what to do is live each day, connect with people, tell the truth, keep amplifying stories, um, really see my neighbor and love my neighbor, and yeah, and just keep hoping that our critical mass is resistant enough, the age of our democracy is resistant enough, because Christian patriarchy is not pro-democracy. They do not.
Right.
I wasn't allowed to vote when I was a trad wife in Christian patriarchy. And what they do, it's so subtle. I see it all the time. They will present something like repealing the 19th and taking away women's rights to vote, and they'll have one group of theobros over here speaking overtly about that. But then in reality, in the lesser congregations, the more mainstream congregations, there's dialogue about, well, does it really matter if we vote? Does our vote really count? Do women really need to vote if their husband's voting? Aren't they just canceling them out? So it's like these little tiny cracks in the wall. Pretty soon you have a movement that takes away your democracy, and you're wondering how did women lose the right to vote in the 21st century? It's like that. It's a subtle change over time.
And I think too, for anyone who has escaped from Christian fundamentalism, and you see everything going on in the news, a national abortion ban. I remember protesting
Yeah.
with Operation Life when I was little, when I was like 10 years old. And of course, now I'm absolutely horrified that
Hmm.
I ever did that. And I've flipped completely 1000% to the other side. But you hear about a national abortion ban, you hear about changing the divorce laws, and I think for some people who never lived that life, they hear about that and they're like, "Oh, well, why would that happen?" And not that they're, like, making jokes about it, but I don't know if it's, like, real to them in the way
Right.
that it's real to someone who lived that life and escaped from it. Like, it is not a joke to me. Like,
Mhm.
you know how bad it is.
Yeah.
And, to me, it feels so heavy and deadly serious, and I know it is possible because we lived through it. Like, whole groups of
Hmm.
people were willing to do that to women.
Yeah. Yeah. They take away any knowledge that how you're choosing impacts people who are not even like you, because
Yeah.
ultimately they don't believe people who are not like us should exist. Like that's what's in the undercurrent, so like it doesn't matter if a whole bunch of other kids are going to die from this policy, or that, one of the popular arguments, pushback arguments, is if they were pro-life, then they would invest more in children. We would have healthcare, and we would have
Right.
daycare, and we would have things like that. And
Yeah.
they don't do that. Why? Because they don't really believe women are supposed to be at work. They don't really believe you need to take your child to the doctor. They're okay if a large POC community declines in numbers because they want white supremacy. It's really like any kind of advocacy I have found has to look at the subtext and what's happening under the surface of their words, and then relying on that pattern recognition again to say, like, is that how it plays out? Because they don't like hearing from survivors. They like silent survivors. They don't want exiles telling their stories.
Right.
Yeah, they like to lead with the promise of what you're gonna get if you do it their way.
Well, and the whole pro-birth moment is just an extension of the idea of have a lot of babies and there's no conversation about being a good parent or making that child's life better. It's just about have babies and keeping women
Mm,
under control. Like that's the thing that they're not talking about.
mhm,
Now you have a new book, I Belong to Me. Can you tell
mhm.
us what it's about and why you wanted to write it?
Yeah, to me, it's the natural follow-up to A Well-Trained Wife. A Well-Trained Wife does have the back 25% is devoted to my healing journey and what happened after I escaped, but that really wasn't, like, enough word count to get into the nitty-gritty of what it was like to forge a path back to selfhood. I was indoctrinated as a child in religion, not even very nefarious religion, but the point was they told me what to believe before I even knew who I was myself. So I didn't have a developed sense of self. As a 33-year-old escapee, I had a child's mind and a child's understanding of the world. It was very naive, and I didn't know how to I didn't know anything about Tia. Like, what do I like? What do I need? I didn't know how to advocate for myself, which did make me a weaker parent at times because I couldn't advocate for anyone else very well either, you know? So my journey is both understanding what it was and how to name things properly, as well as all the modalities that were coming to light and are available for trauma victims, and building a sense of self that doesn't cult hop and fall prey to another predator. I was very scared about cult hopping. It's very common to cult hop. When you leave one cult, you easily fall for another. And I did fall for another couple high control dynamics in different relationships, because I didn't know better. And I didn't know what am I doing that's attracting this? Not so much attracting it in reality, but not unable to identify and combat it and avoid it because I was playing into old patterns. So, how to heal all of that? There was not a book that existed that covered it all, especially from the unique lens of coming from either a high control relationship or a high control religion. And so that's what I hope this is. It's a love letter to survivors. I'm not an academic. I'm not a doctor. I'm just Tia, and I did this. I consider myself whole today. I consider myself an autonomous, sovereign person who, you know, has boundaries and healthy relationships and no longer a fragile psyche. And I hope to give all survivors at least an example of it can be done, and there might be something in here that's helpful to you. So it covers some interesting and strange ground compared to other healing books because, like, my sex chapter deals with vocal training and about fundy baby voice and sounding like a little girl. I talk about story wounds and the way that we're injured by stories in religion, and also how to redeem our own story, shock, aftermath, trauma responses. It's really comprehensive. I'm really grateful they let me write as fat a book as I want because it's very thick. Let me show you.
You could do
It's
some
roughly
damage if you decided to
it
throw it.
is. It is very thick. It's a very good
That's
book.
great.
But you know, so is the crawl back. The crawl
Yeah.
back to selfhood is also a thick journey.
Sounds great. I'm excited to read it. And to everyone listening, I'm going to link this in the show notes so that if you would like to buy it, pre order it, or once it's out, buy it directly. It'll be real easy for you. Now, Tia, at the age of 33, you had lived a whole life.
I feel
Like,
like it.
yeah. So, you've gone through so much in your life, transformation, all of the things that you have gone through. What are some of the biggest lessons you learned?
So one of the things that I take with me every day is that we don't always get to choose. In fact, we rarely get to choose the things that happen to us and come into our world. Um, but what I know I can do is I can make something from what that experience was. I don't go as far as to say I had to experience this or God was
Yeah.
teaching me something. I don't do any of that. But I do say, okay, well, they gave me this big lump of experience. I don't get those years back. The only way I know how to redeem it is to use it for something good. And so that's what my work today focuses on, is taking all of this stuff from the past, making something good because it applies to the present. But it's totally for the redemption of the future. I want a future that is less infiltrated by high control religion, has more progress in it, health, civilization, vision, and I know that I have experience that can help um, be a part of that process. So
Yeah.
that's what I try to do.
Yeah, and I know for me, a big lesson I walked away with was letting go of binary thinking. Because you mentioned
Hmm.
this a little bit just here that,
Yeah.
because it's not true. It's not good that these things happen to you. It's not,
Hmm.
and to
Right.
pretend like, try to make it seem positive and, like, well, everything happens for a reason. I don't believe in that at all.
Mm-mm.
I think it's possible to say this terrible thing happened. It
Yeah.
is also true that I have used that experience to grow, learn, evolve as a person, and now I wanna help other people who have been through the same things. Like, those 2
Yeah.
truths can exist even though they seem to conflict, I don't think they do.
It's important to be able to do that because when you can hold multiple truths at one time, you're automatically less likely to fall into fundamentalism, which is a rigid binary of either or, right or wrong, black or white. And I really try to avoid that. I'm a both and embracer. I want to know what else is true in the situation. And I love having a pliable, flexible mind that is able to grow and be curious and change my mind when it's necessary. All of that was not given to us in fundamentalism. It was, rigid. You'd break the whole system if you changed one thing. I never want to live like that again. And it's very possible to do that outside of religion and just be very binary and extreme about something else, purity of your food or your environment or your political ideology, or listen right past people, because you know the right way. It's very easy to embody a fundamentalist mindset. So I work hard on that, like staying organic.
Now, I have a big question for you that I ask almost everyone that comes on this show. Sometimes I get funny answers, sometimes I get really profound things. But
Mm.
in life, what do you know for sure?
What I know for sure, I saw this on your list and I was like, there is very little surety in the world. But one thing I do trust is about myself is that I can figure it out. I might not, when I'm faced with a hard situation or a hard problem, I might not have a quick answer. I might have not have the best answer, but I can probably either figure it out or figure out how to figure it out. And it's going to be okay. Things work out. I've really learned to not give into urgency or panic or any kind of double down on having the right thing, all the time. And so just giving myself that space of like, it's okay. We can figure this out. Um, Automatically breathe space into a room that felt closed. So that's about it, because not much else is sure in this world.
I know I love mac and cheese for sure.
Uh-huh.
That's positive. Well, thank you
Yeah.
so much for being here, Tia. These are hard things to talk about, and I really appreciate you taking the step to share your story so openly and vulnerably, because not everybody, and that's a hard thing to do. And so,
Yeah.
thank you for being willing to do that. Where can people find you if they want to work with you or hear more from you?
Yeah. I'm Tia Levings, writer on all the social platforms. My books are available anywhere they're sold. The paperback for A Well-Trained Wife comes out February 20th. And like you said, I Belong to Me goes live May 5th. But if you're going to get it, please pre-order it. It makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm around. I answer my DMs, and I'm on Substack a lot too. So, yep.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for being here. And thank you to all of you that are listening today, especially those of you that are on your own journey. We hope you have a great week.
Thank you.